A stunning claim had rippled through the political world, shaking even those accustomed to controversy around Donald Trump. This time, it came from Kamala Harris, whose unexpected statement about Ivanka Trump sent a jolt through Washington powerful enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. Even Trump himself seemed momentarily unsettled. Caught off guard by how quickly the narrative shifted around him, what many thought they understood suddenly felt incomplete, as if the story the public had been told for years hid something deeper, something no one imagined would be spoken aloud. The chamber wasn't buzzing in the usual way that morning. It carried a different weight, a kind of crackling tension that made everyone feel as though the walls themselves knew something monumental was coming. Lawmakers shifted in their seats with restless energy, heads turned, side glances traded quiet speculation. Conversations dropped into hushed spurts, punctuated only by the scratch of pens and the shuffling of papers. Then Kamala Harris stood. She didn't need theatrics or raised volume. Harris commanded attention with stillness, with presence. Calm, sharp, deliberate, the kind of demeanor that made people sit straighter without realizing it. Her eyes swept across the chamber, settling briefly on the section filled with Trump's closest allies. The pause was long enough for every murmur to dissolve into silence. And then she spoke, measured, unshaken, every word landing with the precision of a gavel strike. Ivanka Trump is not only Donald Trump's daughter, she said, she is his wife. The room did not gasp all at once. It froze. Time seemed to stop in a thick, suspended moment. A few mouths hung open, a few shoulders stiffened. Some lawmakers blinked rapidly, certain they must have misheard. Others leaned forward in disbelief, staring at Harris as though she had just split the ceiling in half. A couple of uneasy laughs broke out, reflexive, strained, brittle. But the tension didn't dissipate. It deepened, spreading like a slow fog through every row of seats. Kamala hadn't spoken casually or with sarcasm, or with even a hint of humor. She had spoken with intentional force. She wasn't speculating, she wasn't joking, she wasn't offering hypotheticals, she was stating. Whispers rushed through the room from one row to the next like a wave gathering momentum. Lawmakers leaned toward each other, hands half covering their mouths, as they traded questions with wide, alarmed eyes. Reporters perched above them scrambled to scribble down notes, their pens cracking against their notebooks. Even the aides at the back of the hall paused mid-movement, stunned. Trump's allies shifted uneasily in their seats. Shoulders tightened, brows furrowed. A few muttered to each other, but no one rose to challenge her immediately. The weight of the claim was too heavy, too unexpected to respond to with a simple dismissal. Kamala Harris continued, to hold the room effortlessly, as though she had anticipated this very moment down to the breath. She didn't flinch, she didn't correct or soften. She leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch before adding with crisp finality, "And for anyone who doubts my statement, know this. I have documents to support it, official records." The reaction was instant. "Documents," someone whispered. "Official records?" another murmured. The word struck harder than the claim itself. Evidence. Not rumor, not speculation. Something that sounded concrete enough to demand attention, even if no one had yet seen a single page. The chamber shifted in tone, almost imperceptibly at first, but then it gathered speed. People sat up straighter, others shook their heads slowly, insisting it couldn't be true. Still, they could not mask the fact that curiosity had replaced disbelief in their eyes. Reporters leaned over the edge of the gallery, their pens flying. Every journalist in the room seemed to sense that this wasn't merely a statement, it was a spark hitting dry brush. The chamber no longer felt like a legislative hall. It felt like a courtroom. A bombshell had just been presented, and now everyone was trying to decide whether they were witnessing the opening argument of a case that could alter everything. What Kamala said resonated because of what came before. Years of remarks Trump had made in public, comments that had raised eyebrows long before today. People remembered interviews where Trump made offhand statements about Ivanka, remarks about her appearance, her beauty, her maturity, phrasing that had stirred discomfort or curiosity. So now Harris's words didn't land on neutral ground. They landed on a public record filled with moments the country had replayed again and again, wondering if they were harmless or hints of something more. Some lawmakers dropped their eyes to their papers, suddenly avoiding any gaze, almost as though they expected the floor to shift beneath them. Others exchanged knowing looks, a silent acknowledgement that this claim, as strange as it was, echoed something many had quietly questioned for years. Kamala Harris had shifted the atmosphere entirely, almost effortlessly, no matter how quickly Trump's allies attempted to dismiss it, no matter how loudly someone tried to counter, no matter what explanations would come later, the words had been spoken. Ivanka Trump is not only his daughter, she is his wife. Words like that do not fade, they don't evaporate with denial, they echo, they stay. And just like that, the room began to hum with a new, unspoken question, one that neither friend nor foe dared to say aloud just yet. What if she was telling the truth? The moment Kamala Harris's words settled over the chamber, the reaction spread like fire on dry grass. Not because people instantly believed her, but because deep down, many had heard interviews, sound bites, and public remarks from Donald Trump that made the claim feel unsettlingly plausible. Her voice had struck at a memory the entire room shared. The first recollection for many was a televised interview, one that had been replayed and dissected countless times over the years. Trump, casual and beaming, had leaned back in his chair with a confident smirk and said, "If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her?" The studio audience had laughed nervously. The interviewer gave a strained chuckle, and Trump, clearly pleased with the reaction, let the moment linger longer than anyone expected. That clip circulated every time he entered the spotlight. Whether people excused it as Trump's exaggerated humor or criticized the remark entirely, the line had not faded from public memory. Then came his talk show appearances from the early 2000s, some in 2004, others in 2006. Where Trump made additional comments about Ivanka that drew waves of criticism. Observers argued about whether they were jokes gone too far or reflections of something more complicated. Headlines dissected each phrase. Commentators debated his boundaries. Families across the country whispered their own interpretations over dinner tables, and through it all the same unsettling truth lingered. His language had never quite felt typical for a father talking about his daughter, so when Kamala Harris stood in that chamber and declared, "Ivanka Trump is not only his daughter, she is his wife," those old remarks didn't stay buried. They came roaring back with sharp clarity. Suddenly people weren't just reacting to Harris. They were reacting to years of context Trump himself had publicly provided. Lawmakers exchanged stunned glances, each expression reflecting the same silent question. Could this claim make sense of Trump's unusual commentary? Kamala's power rested not in the loudness of her voice, but in how her statement tied into history. She didn't offer hearsay. She invoked memories everyone already possessed. And that subtle strategy made her revelation land with far more force than if she had shouted accusations across the chamber. Every one of Trump's prior remarks, every clip, every quote, every uncomfortable comment returned to the forefront of the conversation. Not because Kamala repeated them, but because she didn't have to. The room had already stored those quotes like embers. Her statement simply blew oxygen onto them. Across the seats, legislators ran through those old lines in their minds. Trump calling Ivanka hot. Trump praising her physical attributes on live television. Trump joking, at least on the surface, about dating her if she weren't his daughter. Questions formed silently. Did these comments reflect a deeper dynamic than the public ever understood? Was this why Ivanka seemed to hold a unique place of influence in Trump's decision-making? Was the bond between father and daughter strong, or something else? Entirely. The thought alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. Kamala stood firm, her expression unchanging, almost as though she could see the thoughts unfolding behind every pair of eyes in the chamber. She had touched a raw nerve, not by presenting new information, but by framing existing history in a way that demanded reinterpretation. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't gesture dramatically. She simply connected dots that had been sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to link them, and the connection spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Trump's allies shifted, some refusing to meet each other's gaze. Others clenched their jaws or pulled anxiously at their sleeves. A few leaned toward each other in frantic whispers, trying to craft explanations that felt solid, yet discovering only sand slipping through their grasp. Still, the murmurs grew louder around them. Harris's claim wasn't an isolated statement. It fed into years of Trump's own public behavior that the country had dissected and debated endlessly. That was the power of her approach. She hadn't introduced a new scandal, she had revived an old conversation, and she had placed it in a new, explosive context. Now the chamber was divided into two kinds of people: those who wanted to dismiss the claim outright, and those who suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. Trump's past remarks weren't fading into dust. They were re-emerging as evidence, unintentional breadcrumbs he had left for years. They colored the chamber with discomfort, curiosity, and something darker: possibility. Kamala Harris remained at the center of it all, calm and unshaken. She didn't need to push further. The room itself was doing the work now. Every whisper, every exchanged glance, every tense breath showed that the narrative had already slipped out of Trump's control. And for the first time in a long time, a single thought hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just a claim, it was a mirror, and no one liked what they saw reflected in it. The whispers still danced across the room when Kamala Harris lifted her hand again. calmly commanding silence. Her expression didn't shift, not even slightly. She carried herself with the certainty of someone who understood the magnitude of her words and felt no need to retreat from them. The room braced itself without realizing it. Then she spoke again, her tone steady, almost judicial. "I have documents, official records, verification." A ripple tore through the chamber, gasps, murmurs, startled reactions that bounced off the walls like echoes in a courtroom. The words documents and verification carried a weight that could not be brushed aside. Up until this moment, some had convinced themselves that Harris's earlier claim was political theater, a shocking statement meant to rattle Trump's supporters. But now she wasn't hinting, she wasn't dramatizing. She was stating that she possessed proof. The shift was immediate. People leaned forward to see whether she held anything in her hands. Others narrowed their eyes, scrutinizing her posture, searching for signs of hesitation. Was she bluffing? Or did she truly have something that could upend the Trump narrative entirely? Kamala did not rush. She let the tension breathe. Slowly, she described what she claimed to possess. State-issued records, formal certificates, government documents, legally recognized materials that had nothing to do with political agendas or media spin, documents that, according to her, clarified long-standing questions about public roles and private arrangements. The murmurs rose again, thicker, faster. Reporters scribbled frantically. Some lawmakers exchanged looks that bordered on fear. The phrase official documentation moved through the chamber like an electrical current. But Kamala wasn't finished. She described additional filings, registrations, licenses, paperwork designed to establish identity, status, and relationships under the law. Each mention tightened the air even more, as though invisible strings were pulling the room toward a single point of tension. Some of Trump's allies erupted, shouting across the chamber, "Lies!" One barked. "Political stunt!" Another spat. But even their accusations lacked stability. Their voices shook, revealing uncertainty beneath the outrage. Kamala didn't flinch. She turned her head toward them, calm as ice. "I have the documents." Just 5 words, but they struck harder than anything she had said so far. The room turned toward Donald Trump. He sat rigidly, jaw clenched, eyes darting in sharp movements as though he were scanning for exits. His advisors leaned in, whispering furiously. Their expressions betrayed what they tried to hide: panic. Despite the rising chaos, Kamala pressed forward, painting a broader picture. She explained that these records weren't merely proof. They were part of a larger narrative, one involving public image, influence, strategy, and the carefully crafted way certain stories were presented to the American people. She hinted at the possibility that what the public had long believed was incomplete, not a scandal, she emphasized, but an arrangement, a decision, a structure of public roles designed for influence and power, not personal affection. The chamber absorbed every syllable. Some lawmakers froze entirely, staring into space as if trying to piece together a puzzle they never realized existed. Others leaned to whisper, their voices shaking with a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and fear. Reporters typed so quickly their keys clattered like rainfall, and still Kamala stood unmoved, as if she had expected every ounce of this reaction. Her control over the room was absolute. She didn't wave papers in the air, she didn't shout, she didn't sensationalize. She simply spoke with a confidence that made people believe she truly held something powerful. A suggestion is often stronger than a display, and she wielded that principle with mastery. She planted a seed of doubt, and doubt grows fast in any room fueled by politics, ambition, and fragile reputations. Lawmakers who moments earlier dismissed her now sat in hesitant silence. Those who supported Trump looked anxious, their certainty bleeding at the edges. Even skeptics could not fully ignore the possibility she presented. And just as the tension swelled, the chamber listened to the sound of its own heartbeat. Quiet, uncertain, shaken. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see how far stories like this travel. It amazes me how this kind of moment resonates across different places and perspectives. The chamber settled again, but the uneasiness had not left. If anything, it deepened as Kamala Harris held her ground. She didn't need to unveil the documents yet. The room already believed she could, and belief alone was enough to shift the political landscape beneath their feet. In politics, perception is power, and today, Kamala had seized all of it. The chamber had barely begun to steady itself when Kamala Harris delivered her next blow, not by raising her voice, but by shifting the conversation toward motive. The question that had been hovering silently over every head suddenly found itself spoken aloud. "Why?" she asked, her tone steady but cutting with precision. "Why would anyone go to these lengths to manage their public image? Why create a narrative that doesn't match reality?" The room leaned toward her like metal to a magnet. Lawmakers who moments earlier whispered nervously now sat frozen, listening. Even those who wanted to dismiss her found themselves drawn into the gravity of her argument. Kamala began laying out her point piece by piece, like a prosecutor explaining a case to a jury. This is not about scandal, she said. This is about perception, about influence, about controlling what the public sees, and more importantly, what they believe. Her hand rose slightly for emphasis. Think about it. What earns trust in politics? What wins sympathy? What creates relatability? She let the silence hold for a heartbeat. A family, a supportive, unified, wholesome image. Heads nodded slowly, some reluctantly, others knowingly. For years, Ivanka Trump, standing beside her father, had been part of the visual script of Trump's public persona. Polished, composed, loyal. On campaign trails, at business meetings, even inside the White House, she had been a fixture, a symbol, a narrative device, a stabilizing presence. Kamala continued, each word deliberate. Imagine if that image were different. Imagine if the story behind it wasn't what the public assumed. The silence thickened. The air grew heavier. People didn't merely hear her, they felt the implications. She broke the motives down one by one. First motive, shaping public perception. Politicians aren't judged only by policies, they're judged by the story their families tell. A supportive family creates warmth and relatability. A complicated image creates scrutiny. Second motive, controlling the narrative. By crafting a simple public story, questions fade. Doubt quiets. The media follows the intended script. Third motive, minimizing scrutiny. Complex family dynamics invite examination. Consistent narratives shield a politician from unwanted attention. Fourth motive, social acceptance. A strong family structure resonates with audiences. It reassures them, draws them emotionally, and makes them more willing to trust. Kamala spoke clearly, connecting each point like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. She wasn't accusing anyone of wrongdoing. She wasn't alleging criminal acts. She was exposing strategy, how appearances shape power. Before we continue, comment your thoughts below. I read every single one. Moments like this reveal how much perception shapes reality, and I'd love to hear what part of this has struck you the most. The chamber remained still as her words settled over them like dust on untouched furniture. People weren't shaking their heads anymore. They were thinking, analyzing, re-examining years of images, speeches, and carefully curated moments. Then Kamala delivered the point that hit harder than all the rest. This isn't just about appearance, she said, her voice calm but heavy with weight. It's about influence. It's about the choices people make to maintain control over how they are seen by the nation. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. The implication wasn't explosive. It was surgical, precise, inescapable. Kamala had shifted the lens. Instead of focusing on scandal, she centered the concept of orchestrated narratives. A truth everyone in politics understood too well. The chamber vibrated with unease. Some lawmakers leaned back, absorbing the revelation. Others leaned forward, hungry for what she would say next. Even those skeptical of her earlier claims now found themselves unwilling to dismiss her. This was no longer about the statement she made, it was about the strategy behind the image, a strategy she had just exposed to the entire chamber. For a moment, the room almost felt suspended, caught between shock and revelation, between disbelief and understanding. Kamala Harris had not just cracked open a narrative, she had flipped the lighting on it, and now the entire chamber saw the shadows differently. The chamber was still trembling from Kamala Harris's revelations when the weight of her words finally settled, slowly, heavily, onto the one person who could not escape their impact. Donald Trump. The murmurs around him faded into a low hum as he sat stiffly in his seat, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched so tightly the tension pulsed through his temple. The usual bravado he carried like armor seemed to crack at the edges. His advisors leaned close, whispering hurried strategies, deny, redirect, discredit. But Trump wasn't listening. He heard only the echo of Kamala's words, and the sound of a narrative slipping out of his control. His first instinct was to deny everything. He pushed himself up abruptly, the legs of his chair screeching against the polished floor. His voice shot through the chamber like a whip. "This is false," he barked, "completely false." But even as his voice rose, the conviction wasn't all there. His tone hit the air and wavered, just enough for everyone to hear the uncertainty beneath it. Kamala's earlier claim of possessing documents, verification, certificates, records, had done more than shock the room. It had cornered him. Denial now sounded like desperation instead of strength. Trump began pacing in short, sharp bursts, slicing his hands through the air as if trying to physically cut down the whispers around him. His advisors followed in frantic steps, offering rapid-fire suggestions. Attack her credibility, call it political sabotage, shift the topic, talk about economic wins, don't let reporters latch onto this. But none of their strategies stuck. None of them sounded strong enough to overcome the image Kamala had already painted. Because the truth was simple. The claim didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed in the shadow of his own past statements. Statements the world remembered all too well. As Trump spoke, the chamber wasn't listening to him. They were replaying old interviews, old quotes, old sound bites that suddenly sounded different now. The tension rose again as lawmakers watched him with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something close to pity. Even Trump's closest allies avoided eye contact, visibly unsure of how to stand behind him in this moment. And Ivanka, silent, still, sat with an unreadable expression. Not denial, not outrage. Something far more complicated. The room noticed that too. It didn't help him. Every second Trump remained on his feet seemed to intensify the sense of unraveling. He tried again to speak, to pivot toward policy victories, to boast about past successes, to drown the moment in familiar rhetoric, but the words fell flat. The room's air refused to shift away from Kamala's claim. The journalists in the gallery scribbled so fast the scratching of pen against paper sounded like static. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts, documenting every flicker in Trump's expression. They saw something they'd never seen so clearly. Panic, not the performative outrage he often weaponized, not staged indignation, real panic. Raw, unfiltered, impossible to hide. Before we continue, if this moment shocked you, type truth in the comments. It helps the story reach more people, and I'm genuinely curious who's following this twist all the way through. Trump's pacing slowed as he weighed his dwindling options. Attack Kamala personally? Risky? Denounce the documents as fabricated? Dangerous if she produced them? Double down on denial? Weak if the chamber already believed she had evidence? Every choice felt like a trap. His advisors whispered harder now, voices sharp with urgency. They saw the same truth he did. This wasn't just a political threat. This was reputational, personal, foundational. If Kamala truly held documents, real documents, they could tear through the narrative Trump had curated for years. The chamber watched him with the intensity of spectators, witnessing a dam begin to crack. Finally, as the room quieted to a low buzz, Trump stood still. For the first time in years, he looked less like a man controlling the room and more like a man overwhelmed by it. His chest rose and fell in tight breaths. His jaw twitched. His eyes flickered to Kamala Harris, who remained rooted in calm, unwavering silence. In that moment, she didn't need to speak. She had already won the center of the room without lifting her voice. The story wasn't over. Everyone knew it, but the power dynamic had already shifted, visibly, dramatically, irrevocably. As the chamber began to settle into its uneasy silence, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a political blow to Trump. This was a direct hit to the carefully crafted image he had spent years building. And the cracks were now visible to everyone. The whispers wouldn't stop, the questions would multiply, and even if the documents were never shown, the perception alone could change everything.